I'll start with you, Slash. Tell me a little bit about where your attraction for horror began, because I was reading a little bit about this, and I think people know that you were born in England. Yeah. I didn't realize kind of how much of an influence that would have had on this part of your life.
Right. Well, I mean, to start, my parents were big horror fans, so my dad turned me on to a lot of literature when I was really, really young. He gave me, he turned me on to Ray Bradbury and Edgar Allan Poe and, that kind of thing. And I remember one of the coolest things that he did was he gave me a box of the War of the World tapes.
Oh, yeah. The Orson Welles
narration, and that's and he told me the whole thing about, and my dad was very well-read British, and he's very well-read, that's the best way to put it. And he had a great way of sort of delivering these stories to me and getting me into it. And then my mom turned me on to all the classic horror movies from the 30s and the 50s and and I was born in the 60s. So everything that was currently going on from that point on, I went with her to go see and that kind of thing. But the Hammer movies in England, I remember very well, the sort of B movies that all these crazy.
Well, they had the best posters.
Stories. Oh, yeah.
They had the best posters, Hammer Films, and they also had, they were really, lurid, I guess is the only way you could use to describe them, right? The blood was like redder than any other red blood you'd seen anywhere. There were always like the best looking girls in them, Barbara Steele and all those people. So the horror films or the Hammer films had a lot going for them.
Yeah, I remember being a huge Oliver Reed fan.
Yeah.
And then, of course, Vincent Price and that whole list of great British horror actors.
Yeah.
But yeah, so I think I have two kids and one of them just has a natural affinity for horror and one of them doesn't. I was one of those kids that just was like spiders and snakes and ghouls and goblins and have never changed.
And so, Anthony, tell me a little bit about when I look at your resume, there's not a lot of horror here.
Yeah.
But tell me a little, do you have an affinity for it? Does it go back years like Slash's?
I mean, I do. The funny thing is I think all of us as children, the only thing you really remember is being scared.
Right.
And that has a lot to do with horror movies. And, I came into the art department actually after the writer's strike in America when my first movie fell apart. And I actually Gore Verbinski brought me in as an artist, a storyboard artist. And I got brought on his first movie, or a big movie called BioShock at the time, which was going to be a huge horror movie. So, I've been known for like designing creatures and all sorts of stuff in there. I did creatures for Cabin in the Woods and all that stuff.
Cabin in the Woods is underrated, probably the coolest, well, certainly the coolest Cabin in the Woods, creep out movie ever. But definitely. I think just one of the coolest horror films of the last few years.
Yeah, no, great. I mean, so, it was, horror's always had a special place, but it's been one of those things where I have an affinity for kind of unique horror stuff. Like I'm a big fan of like horror from the 70s, like Don't Look Now and those kind of movies. And that was what was great about the movie Slash brought to me on this, which wasn't your stereotypical horror movie. We kind of just tried to do something a little different, do something a little more haunting than something you actually think about when you left, rather than see an arm cut off and forget about it 10 minutes later.
Yeah, it's interesting because the production company is called Slasher Films.
Yeah.
Now, I think there's obvious reasons why, but it's not a slasher movie.
It's the total antithesis of that.
Yeah.
And I actually have no aspirations to make any slasher movies. It's not really the style of movies that I'm into. So it's funny, slasher films, and I think a lot of kids go, "Oh my God, slashers!" Kids love slasher movies.
Yeah.
But that's not really the direction I'm going. So
well, it's funny when me and him first met, our first meeting. I'm going, I love the script, but I know you're called Slasher Films, but I don't want to make a slasher movie.
Right. Yeah.
And then he was like, me neither. All right, then let's go.
Well, what was it about this story that grabbed you?
I think it was a lot of great sort of, stuff rolled into one. You had religion, you had the brave young family, you had the monster, the creation of the monster, and it just seemed like a lot of really cool themes all rolled into one, but a fairly simple story. It wasn't too complex. It was in the mind's eye, it was something that was not going to be too complicated to make and not overly expensive, And out of all the scripts that I read at the time, which most of them were gratuitous violence, for want of a better word, this was the only one that had that sort of creepy, haunting kind of vibe to it, you know.
Yeah, I like that as well, and I think that it's interesting about horror fans. You said, this would be affordable. We'd be able to get this one made for, not a huge amount of money. And horror fans don't care if the movie costs $300 million or if it costs $100.
Yeah.
As long as it works.
As long as the eyeball will squirt across the room.
That's right. But as long as it's scary, as long as it delivers on its promise, they don't care about the budget. They don't care about having huge stars. Although you have James Tupper, who's Canadian, and Anne Heche in this film, but but it doesn't really matter to them because horror fans, I think, are the purest fans in the sense that they go for what they like.
Well, it's funny because being in the rock and roll business, horror fans and heavy metal fans are a lot alike. It's a very particular niche, and the fans know a lot about the genre. They know what they like. They're very particular. They know what they don't like. And metal fans are the same way. They're very loyal. They know exactly what's cool and what's not cool. They know when it's fake and when it's not fake. And that's similar with horror. So
I guess that's it. They know what's fake and what isn't. So tell me, Anthony, a little bit about making sure that this movie didn't feel fake.
I mean, when we were working together on this, it was really to try and do something we hadn't seen 1,000 times. Right. And it's hard with the horror genre. You get put in a fence and then, you see what's coming. You have to kind of go the opposite way.
Yeah.
And so, I think what we accomplish in the film is that we whatever cliches you see coming, we've kind of just taken little turns around them and tried to keep you always guessing. And that was kind of, I think, the hardest part about this kind of project and story, and keeping it very simple, to a family moving to a town, finding out they're chosen to be there. Like using that as the simple story and taking everything else out of the script off of that.
Right.
I think really made it an effective little movie.
We've just got a minute left.
Yeah.
This movie is about psychological concepts of fear and that sort of thing, which is, I think, the thing that makes it so effective. I think that if it was just a blood and guts thing, we've seen that 100 times, but this one burrows into your head a little bit more. We'll come back and talk about it on the other end a little bit, but I guess that's what you were going for, right?
Yeah, we wanted one of the things when we really hit it off, and I met a lot of directors that came in and had meetings, and some of them well known, some of them I never heard of. And Anthony came in, and we had a meeting of the minds instantly about doing something where there was story development and character development, so that you got sucked into that before the mayhem started, so that you built an attachment to the characters, and following to see where the story is going to go. And that was something that we clicked on right away. And we had Rosemary's Baby was a little bit of an influence there.
And I'm an excellent air guitar player, and I thank you for that.
They have contests for that.
I know they do, and I know. I'd be embarrassed to do it in front of you.
It embarrasses me to watch them.
Mine, I don't do it in front of anyone. It's sort of more of a kicking around the house, singing in the shower kind of thing. Yeah. But we're here to talk about Nothing Left to Fear, which is a new film from Slasher Films. But as we've said in the last segment, got to make the delineation that this isn't a slasher film.
Right.
It is. From the production house Slasher, but it's really a psychological drama. And we were just sort of touching on that a little bit before. Horror films work when you care about the characters. Right. And it's not just about blood and guts. And I think people kind of forget about that a little bit. So let's expand on what we were just talking about in the last segment about trying to make sure that you cared about what happened to James Tupper and Anne Heche in this film.
Do you want to go for it?
Yeah, I mean, well, I think the biggest part to this and something we tried to do was not do a generic family, but we really wanted to craft like a family that you believe like these people are really related, and that's the first part, and then building the slow burn up to something happening, not like we're automatically something going wrong with somebody or somebody's the bitchy girl or these like very stereotypical cliches that lead us and we know what's going to happen to that character later, and there was a lot of references, like he says Rosemary's Baby, or even like short stories like The Swimmer or what's the other one, The Lottery. Like those ones for me were big, like structures of how I wanted to build the film.
And just sort of the idea of atmosphere, I guess.
Atmosphere,
right?
Yeah, like building a tone and building an atmosphere and building that tension of something's gonna happen, because when it happens, there's no way of rebuilding that again. It's like, the way we did it is it's a slow build, and once the floodgates are open, I mean, the movie rockets to the end.
Is this kind of slash the template of the films that you want to make at Slasher Films?
Well, I mean, I wouldn't say that this particular movie is necessarily the template. It's one direction that we obviously felt that this story was, the structure was built for. Now, if I'm looking for the next one, and it doesn't necessarily have to be religious, it doesn't necessarily have to involve a young 5-member family, or it doesn't necessarily have to be the same kind of slow burn. But the template is just to have a story that is engaging and characters that support it,
right? And
so that you get into this place where you're almost part of, you can understand what the people are feeling, and it's you know what I mean. So you become invested,
right,
in what's going on, and like I always talk about gore in a way that is something that I don't like. It turns me off. It's not that. It's just it has to have a place, and it doesn't need to be so graphic that everything is so detailed, because a lot that's left to the imagination is way more unnerving than what you actually see. Mm-hmm. So I want to just keep following those kinds of that sort of philosophy.
Absolutely. We're talking to director Anthony Leonardi and Slash about their film. One of my guests today, Slash, also joining him in the studio, Anthony Leonardi. They are the team who's put together a really cool horror movie called Nothing Left to Fear for Slasher Films. And I just, hearing you play guitar like that, are your hands insured? They must be. Your fingers?
There's no such thing, is insuring your hands. You just are insured.
So your entire thing is in.
I think somebody had asked about that, and you can't specifically.
Yeah, because I'd always heard that Jimmy Durante, remember a famous comedian,
his nose
was insured and all that kind of stuff. So I guess you can't, because those fingertips are worth money, my friend. So we're talking about music a little bit. So let's talk about the score to the film. It's really effective, cool score. Tell me a little bit about putting that together.
Well, the cool thing about being a producer is you can get on the score early. Really. So Anthony had storyboarded the movie out pretty early, and I started writing music, or just basically coming up with different ideas, and then I would spoon feed them basically to Anthony to see which ones he sort of had a taste for, and that went on for a little period of time. And there was a couple things that were picked out, and then eventually there was a theme song, which ended up being the basis for a lot of the. Certain parts of that song instrumentally made its way into the movie.
Right.
But Anthony introduced me. We didn't want it to be a guitar-driven score. Mm-hmm. And so Anthony introduced me to a friend of his, Nick O'Toole, and he's a scoring composer, sound designer, brilliant guy. And so we hit it off, and I just started going over the stuff that Anthony was cool with and giving it to Nick, and he would make orchestral interpretations of it. It was a really fascinating experience for me, because I'm not a scoring composer per se. I don't technically. It's really hard for me to sit there and watch the counters and I can just sort of play by feel and watch the scene and sort of make up stuff. Anyway, but
and so just to be like, so you did record it that way, and then that was given to someone that transposed it for the orchestra.
Exactly.
That's cool.
Yeah, and he's a brilliant melodic guy, and he really did all the heavy lifting for this movie. And we'd sit together, and he and I would sit together, and we'd go through whatever ideas he'd worked on and sort of put in there in the morning and sort of mess around with stuff. And it was just a lot of fun. And then a couple days a week, Anthony would come over, and Anthony has absolutely no knowledge of music whatsoever.
None, really.
But he's got a great feel for the emotional, what's going on emotionally on the screen. And so he would really fine tune and pick things that didn't necessarily fit the emotional thing that he was looking for.
Right.
And so he would go, "Can you just make this go up, or you can make this go down?" And there's three of us sitting there. It was pretty funny, but we had a really good time doing it. And I thought one thing I'm really proud of is the way that the score supports what's going on the screen, like fully, and that's really important to me, because I love movies where you've got a great story and a visual, and then you have the right accompaniment that really gets the point across. Are
there scores that really influenced you, or is there a score that you remember going, that
Well,
that just really did what you just said, influenced your feel about the whole
well,
movie?
you hear stuff in movies, and as a musician, you listen a lot more to the score than maybe the average person does.
Yep.
But a lot of what a person goes through in a drama or in a scary movie or whatever, a lot of the feelings that they're having as the movie's going along is influenced by the score without them even knowing it. That's what really drives it home. And, obviously, probably the most iconic score I can think of for a scary movie has got to be Jaws.
Yeah.
I mean, there's nothing more effective than that foreboding.
Boom, boom.
Dun, dun, dun. But there's been, Clockwork Orange, which was all classical. It was Beethoven. Was an amazing score, even though it was already recorded music. But
Well, I love the idea of that score because what it does is it takes music that you're familiar with, puts it in a different context, and it makes it even crazier. And that to me was the brilliance of that.
Yeah, there's certain Beethoven pieces that I'll hear and I'm automatically picture the scene in Clockwork Orange.
Singing in the Rain, I can never hear without seeing that scene in my head, and it's too bad because it's a song about innocence and beauty and all that kind of stuff, and it's just the most vile scene that it goes along with in that film.
John Carpenter's real simple horror stuff was, probably as iconic as horror movies gets.
The interesting thing about this process too was because I don't speak music, it was easy for me to just do a painting and say, this is what I feel, this is where I'm going, and then he could take that painting and he would hear something and send it back. And that's kind of how we worked in the beginning, and it was really great. The thing I'm proud of is that all the elements work together. So I think it's really important in a movie, and you're successful when the score doesn't pop up above the picture doesn't pop up above the score, when you have that seamless experience where you're not thinking about the elements, you're thinking about the story.
I've seen movies recently, I won't name names, where the movie itself is actually pretty good, but when you start to really listen to what's going on, it's a separate thing.
Right.
Yeah.
And it doesn't do anything for you. And it could be so much stronger if they worked in tandem.
Do you think that you're a little more attuned to it because you're a musician, and I can only imagine that you hear things a little differently than the rest of us?
Well, I remember Fantasia when I was a kid. That was such a big musical. Obviously it was a musical. But that was really important to me as a kid. So I think I've always listened for the music way before I ever became a musician. But now I can actually play something. So I can execute it. If I hear something in my head or I feel something, I can find the notes on the guitar and try and express it.
Do you play guitar every day?
I desperately.
Yeah?
Yeah, I play all the time, except for right now because I didn't bring a guitar to Toronto with me. But I'm somebody who is constantly writing and carries my guitar around with me all over the place.
Yeah, that's funny because he would be sending me cues random hours of the night, like, hey, just listen to this. What do you think? But I think that's what's different about our movie too. Is most movies you finish it and then a composer comes on, where the composer started the day my interview. We started talking music that day, so it was a totally different experience.
Just wrap up. Does the day feel incomplete, I guess, is the question, unless you play guitar?
Yeah. When I get home from this little quick trip, I'll be desperate to get on my guitar and all the stuff that's going on in my head, apply it to the instrument so I make sure I don't forget it,
And are there hundreds of hours of tape sitting around just waiting to be released someday?
No, it's not. Everything that I'm working on gets released thereafter pretty quickly. I don't like to have stuff. There is a fair share of music that I haven't done anything with, probably just because it wasn't good enough.
Or anything that is sort of is there French madrigal music or something like that would surprise us, sitting around there?
No, it's at the record store. It's just under a different name.
Guys, thanks so much. The movie is called Nothing Left to Fear. My guest in studio / and director Anthony Leonardi.
Thanks. Nice talking.
Thank you.
Thank you.